Hey everyone, it's Bob Perkins bringing you a special edition of the Inside Sales Studio here out of Phoenix, Arizona. And I have two special guests with me today from Infinity. First is Leidigh, who's the Business Development Manager, and then Jsloan, who's the VP of Sales at Infinity as well. All right, so today's topic is really about outsourcing. And I have to tell you that a lot of inside sales organizations and companies in general, the vast majority outsource at some point or are continually outsourcing. In fact, in my own career, I worked for four large companies running their inside sales, and at each one, we needed to outsource. Sometimes we were breaking into a new market. Sometimes we needed to launch a new product quickly, or we just needed supplemental sales help. So I'm very familiar with outsourcing. In fact, with all the growth we're seeing today, we're seeing a surge in the need for outsourcing. So today, we're going to learn some secrets from Zach and Justin about when to outsource, but more importantly, the best practices in selecting an outsourcer, and then launching a program, and then how do you engage and manage and collaborate with an outsourcer so that they become an extension of your sales team. So guys, it's great to have you today, and let's get this started. And you know, it's not a matter of if somebody's going to outsource; it's a matter really of when. A lot of people viewing this are outsourcing today. Maybe they're not happy, or they're struggling, or maybe they're thinking about using an outsourcer. So if you're really looking to select someone and you don't know quite where to start, where do you begin? And Justin, will kind of start it off with you.
Sure. I'm a big believer with you that it's not if, but when. Yeah. And the companies that have adapted it often have very large procurement teams that have been put together, and that's all they do is they go in and they ask all the questions that need to be. But for some other companies that are smaller and maybe not as familiar with outsourcing, you have to start somewhere, right? And so when you get on the phone, or there's always, you can hop on Google and say outsource sales, but that's probably not the best way to find somebody that you're going to turn over a sales operation to. And so as we go through different processes, figuring out the right ways rather than just a quick sales pitch before you turn over it. Everyone's going to promise that they can do the work. And it's going to be great. If you don't believe me, just ask me, right? But you want to comment on how to figure out if people are the real deal?
Yeah, so some ways to gut check, because, Justin, a lot of people will ask us, how do we know you're going to deliver on what you're saying? Because that's what the last provider told us. And there's a few things that we could all, agree on internally here is, number one, you should want to do an RFP. You should do multiple, right? You should always make sure that the candidate, isn't the only one you talk to. Right. That's obvious. But then some things that not a lot of, prospective clients are doing today are things like site visits, right? I would strongly encourage site visits. Client referrals from current clients, companies should be able to provide those, or case studies. And then the key that we've kind of found that has been a hot button for prospective clients is go through and really vet out and talk to and get in the process of what their sales managers are doing internally, right? Because they're the strategic anchors of the company. They're the ones running your team, potentially. They're the ones that are likely your line of communication from the front lines. And so, the last thing I would mention is just kind of tying all that up is it should be collaborative and also transparent. You should be able to go through that.
This piece on a site visit, there's a lot you can accomplish. You absolutely want to get to an outsourcer to visit them. You make a really good point, Zach, around really spend some time with the manager, because the leader of the people is so critical. Plus, as you said, it's the one you'll be working with most of the time. So those are some really good points. Justin, anything else to add? You said it earlier. Everybody's going to say, hey, we're the right outsourcer for you. Is there anything else you want to look for besides some of those things?
No, but yeah, I mean, again, going back to the RFP comment and finding some way to benchmark between potential companies that you're going to work for. I go against the grain a little bit where I actually like RFPs and they take a tremendous amount of time, but sometimes companies don't know the right questions to ask. You know, this might be their first time or whatnot. We very often send out RFP templates with maybe too many questions to ask, and they can decide what's important and what's not. Because as much as, you know, you have to be perfect with, hey, can you sell or not? I mean, RFPs back in the day were, can you sell? And, or if it was an inbound program, it's how do you lower our handle time, right? And now it's much more, you know, let's talk about your culture.
Yeah.
You know, show me what an average day in the life is of your employee, because the more that you invest in the employees, the better performance you're going to get naturally. Or technology, tech stack, or compliance reasons can often be the decision makers between companies. Okay, I sign up for you. What kind of reporting do you have that can show me, you know, what those people that I've hired are doing on a day-to-day basis? You know, let's say that you're a smaller company that has 10 or 15 people on the phones. You might not have all of the tracking showing exactly what those people are doing every day in order to get that incremental lift. Right. You know, through technology and AI and all that kind of good stuff that we hear about all the time, there's a lot of really great tools out there for making your people better. And it's exciting when you get to, I mean, again, by diving under the hood and understanding, hey, what does this company have versus this company? You can actually see, hey, this is, you know, they're investing in people and technology. That's great.
This is really interesting. Now, I didn't even mention what Infinity does. I'm going to take a minute and go over that. Because
no sales pitch, Bob. No sales pitch.
No pitch yet. Maybe later. But listen, Infinity has worked with the AISP for a number of years. They're a sponsor. They're a partner. We also utilize some of your own processes and technology in the AAISP organizational benchmark and certification of organizations. So we know what you folks do, but first and foremost, you're an outsourcer. And if I heard you correctly, you said that you will even give a prospect, a potential client, an RFP with all these questions, which they can actually go use and ask other outsourcers to compare. I love it.
Yeah, why not?
Why not?
I mean, let's put all the cards on the table and see who has the best hand.
Yeah.
All right, so let's kind of wrap up selecting. So here I'm a senior leader. I need to look at a few outsourcers. Maybe I get a referral. I do my RFP thing. And that, you know, that final kind of gut check, if everything looks about the same, or maybe out of 3 or 4, I got a final 2. I'm looking at Infinity and ABC Outsourcing. Can you give any final bit of advice on how to break that tie?
Yeah, you know, I would say, and Justin hit a little bit on it, obviously their cultures, you know, does it align with your culture, and are they going to represent your brand, right, in the way that you want it to? But then the other side of it, I would say, is look at their hiring process and that kind of thing, and a lot of times that's something that's forgotten. Yeah. Because you're so sales focused, but obviously one of the biggest things that, you know, can bring to an organization freedom wise is not having to go through the ringer on hiring salespeople and all that kind of thing.
Maybe it segments into what we're going to talk about a little bit is, if you're down to 2 people or 2 companies, start having the discussions of, if we do business together, what does launching a program look like? Yeah. You know, because at the end of the day, you know, the work begins once the contract's signed. You know, that's the easy part, really, is we can all say whatever on paper, but what's the actual process for creating a team?
Perfect segue, right? So let's say those are some good questions to break the tie, but let's say the leader has selected who they're going to work with. Let's talk about best practices, what to look for when launching and onboarding a program.
Yeah, I mean, so at the end of the day, it's how systematic of an approach do you have to creating the best chance of success, right? And implementation is a lot more than a checklist. And I can remember the days when there would actually be a checklist of 150 things. And if you check all of these, you're just magically going to have a great program, right? Everything's going to go perfect.
Sounds like my last onboarding program for a sales rep.
Exactly. Checking boxes is great. But if you don't dive under the hood, a lot of times we're really becoming extensions of the company that we work with. And no matter who you choose as an outsourcing partner, that's an extension of your company. If all of a sudden you hire them and you go to market and they're saying, hey, we can make phone calls in 3 weeks, they're probably just checking some boxes. When you go through and you understand the skill set of the individual, he talked about hiring, and I at the end of the day, the people on the phones are the ones that make or break a program, right? You could have the best technology, you could have the best everything, but if the people aren't the right fit, it doesn't matter. But how do you go through understanding how those right people are? I like actually working with different departments. Let's say we're in a high-end lead gen program. We need to not just work with the marketing department, because marketing departments want leads, right? But we need to talk with those salespeople and find out, when we get a lead, how do we set up those people for success?
Yeah, no, in fact, I had this question I teed up a minute ago when you started going here. And that is, look, I remember working with an outsourcer once that the agents, the sales reps at the outsourcer never once spoke to any of my either inside or field reps. And I thought, that's crazy, because if I had inside reps doing the lead, there was lead generation. If I had an SDR, BDR team, of course they'd be talking to the field or inside AEs all the time. And I'll put you on the spot. This is not a question we had prepared for. At Infinity, would you encourage that with a client?
I don't see any other way to create a long-term engagement other than that. Yeah. We don't do project work. And if somebody says, hey, we just want you to call these 500 people, do the best you can, we'll go from there. That's not our model. And there are companies out there, but even if that is your model, there still has to be a communication level that says, if we do this, what's best case scenario? And don't just ask the person that hired you, because they're, what they look at success, other people are going to look at success differently. And, especially in lead gen, if you're turning over a lead to someone, or if it's sales, you need to understand from their entire sales organization, what's the best process to go through that sets up their company, and how do you keep it ongoing? Because again, let's say that I sell something on behalf of a Fortune 50 client and they become a client. I need to understand what that looks like after the contract signed.
Yeah.
Because now, again, just like when we do an RFP and we sign a contract, that's where the work begins. Yeah. Well, for some companies, when we complete the sale, that's when their work begins.
That's where the work begins.
Management and all that kind of good stuff.
So you've really become an extension of that company completely.
100%.
You have to be. Yep.
Okay, so the onboarding, I got you sidetracked a little bit there. I'm sorry, but the components to look for, if there's a viewer out there that has selected an outsourcer, they get to this. How do we get started? How do we onboard? So you mentioned a couple things. That doesn't happen quickly. You have to spend a lot of time understanding the client's business. Are there a few others to look for?
What I would say is, look, understand that you're never going to be 100% hitting the ground running. No matter how well you prepared, which I think you've hopefully picked up by now under this discussion, that you should prepare, well and be collaborative and take time to make the right decision on your partner. But you don't need to scale to 25, 30 heads right out of the gate. Best practices in the industry are typically start with a smaller team.
Okay.
So your victories are small, but also your losses and your growing pains, if you will, are small as well. Find your recipe for success, and once you have that, that's when you scale and achieve the productivity level and revenue that you're hoping for with that part.
That's an interesting concept. Do you see a lot of clients even at Infinity to start small then ramp? Is that pretty common?
We built our company on pilots for 22 years. I mean, that's if every company that you look at, even the Fortune 50 companies that we have, were almost always started with a call that, hey, another company couldn't do this, can you? Or we have a new concept we're thinking about, is this something that we could try?
Got it.
And then, you know, going back to kind of what he said regarding how that process looks over a pilot phase, you know, what's the transparency like from the client that you're working with?
Okay.
Best practices would be full transparency. I mean, at any point, you want to be able to walk into the company that you're hiring and talk with the people that are on the phones.
Do you ever have a client note just show up unannounced?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, usually it's like a text message 15 minutes ahead of time. But that's game as long as you bring donuts or something. But
it was, look, when I outsourced many years ago, you can tell by my gray hair, but
Looks good, though.
you would never show up at an outsourcer unannounced, or even with 15, 20 minutes notice. So that's really good.
I mean, obviously there's always professional courtesy and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah.
The idea being that if you give notice the exact moment that you're walking in and you have an exact script of what's going to go, hey, you get to talk to these 4 people. We have 7 phone calls for you to listen to, and here's the exact script of your day. And then we'll make sure that we're on either side of you when you walk out. We've had partners that have come to us that is actually their arrangement with their outsource partner. Right. Is you're only allowed to talk with the best of the best, whereas the reality is you're paying for all of them. You might as well talk to all of them. Understand the concerns of the top performers, the medium performers, and the lower performers if there are some. That's how you get the full transparency.
Full transparency as you would if it was your own team. Okay.
Right.
We need to kind of move along here. There's so much to cover. Can you very briefly, before we move off the onboarding, touch on the type of training you do? Or better phrased, if you're looking for an outsourcer, what would you expect in good training?
This is going to be your first collaboration point, you know, once you're out of, you know, the boardroom discussions. And what I mean is kind of launching, right? Because your training department is going to get with the partners in some fashion, right? Now, depending on the arrangement, it could be your outsourcing partners doing the training, right? They've had their head of training development, learn the product and go down the line. Sometimes you train the outsourcing partners, candidates. But, you know, I would say before even the training is the hiring process. I know I touched on it a little bit earlier, but you need to be able to relay to your potential partner, okay, these are the type of, this is our right fit customer profile. So this is the type of, sales cycle we have. It's a very consultative, or maybe it's very transactional. And make sure you're hiring the right people before you even start the training. So,
okay. So really, that's a really good point. Before you even get into that, you really need to understand the hiring profile.
So I'm a huge fan of train the trainer, and that's really a best practice that we use and every major company uses, because as relationships grow, you can't expect your outsourced partner to train all your people. And so, and every company does it a little bit differently. It could be, a video like we are right now, where we get to understand from the trainer how they normally go through training. Or, for a new client that we have, they're actually right now, we had, I think, 5 or 6 people fly down for 2 weeks to the headquarters of a major company, and they go through. And what's great is that company now we get to understand their culture more in depth. We get to understand that partnership. We get to create those relationships. But they did something beautiful that I like, because we go down there for 5 or 6 days. Then we get to come back and we get to build our training materials off of what we learned. And so what's great is they're not taking their process and shoving it down your throat and saying, this is how you have to do it. What they're saying is, we've hired you as a professional inside sales organization that has years of experience doing this. We'd like to show you what we want to accomplish, what we've hired you for, and then you can go create those materials.
Okay.
That's a true partnership.
Yeah, that's great. So another good point, again, senior leaders out there watching this, if you're selecting or have selected, make sure you build that in. I absolutely love bringing the leaders or the program directors or the trainers into the client account. Okay, we're going to move on to a couple of quick tips because we got to kind of wrap here in just a minute. Finally, you've selected, you've trained, you've onboarded, you got your first sale, right? Hopefully a lot of sales, and now you're in the meat of it. What are a couple of tips, best practices leaders should expect or look for that their outsourcers should be doing for that ongoing communication collaboration?
Yep. So you should, Bob, have weekly cadences, monthly and quarterly, right? So weekly could look like, weekly phone call between the sales director, the sales manager, and whatever point of contact you're using internally, right? You should have reporting, my opinion, daily sent to you.
Okay.
Same reporting the outsourcing company is going to get internally themselves, right? I'm at a high level team wise, month to date, week to date, per a account executive or salesperson, and then reporting that is very important as well as things like, here's the businesses that we've lost or won. So our CRM we're relaying that information to our partner, and you're not crossing wires with the same business, if you have an account team and things like that. So that's weekly. And then you should have business reviews monthly and quarterly. One thing I would recommend people do more if they have partners is what we call quarterly business reviews. And that's when you get really, really high level and you're aligning, hey, how does what we're doing as an outsourcing partner align with your internal growth roadmap and your initiatives, and how can we better support you and vice versa?
The QBRs are great. In fact, you were reading my mind. I wanted to ask about that. And the question is, internally, a best practice for an internal sales team would be a QBR where the leader and the leaders and even sometimes executives, the field, are inspecting the frontline sellers. In the QBR, you explain, and maybe Justin, this question's for you. Have you ever seen a company come in for a QBR where they then inspect, discuss, question the actual folks on the phone that are selling?
Yeah, so the goal is with weekly business reviews, you're plugging those holes small before they come big, right? And so if there is a little bit of alignment that's off, you're fixing that. And again, with dedicated teams, you should have access to them 24/7. It shouldn't just be once a week or whatnot. But there has to be a commitment from both companies that are working together to not only want to review things every month or every quarter, because that's where things can shift a lot. And especially during pilots, sometimes things can change 8-10 times a month. If you only meet once a week, that's an issue. Our goal with every QBR is that you're never actually discussing what's already been done, but for maybe 5 minutes of the QBR. And then for the next hour or two, or I don't know, day, then you're spending on what's the next quarter look like. Because if you've done your job and there's transparency, you already know what's happened in the last quarter.
Fair enough. Yeah.
There should not be any surprises over what results were or how many calls were made or what XYZ, right? You can set any metrics you want. The goal should be, hey, what's your goals for the next quarter, and are we aligned for that? So that 3 months from now, all we're doing is again having a conversation about what we accomplished and what we're going to accomplish.
Should a leader out there that has selected or looking at outsourcing, should they expect the outsourcer to share call recordings, assuming that it's compliant call recordings? But
yeah, absolutely. There's a few reasons why. It could be like on a lead gen program where someone wants to be able to hear that call and really get a feel for what they're getting into with their appointment. Or it might be someone who has been sold in a B2B acquisition format, and 5 months later they're canceling or calling to cancel because, our sales rep said this, or this. We've all, exaggerated, I'm sure, when you're trying to get out of some sort of satellite TV or something like that, right? And there you get the call recording. Well, no, that salesperson explained the contract correctly, and there's your proof. And I could give a lot more reasons, but you got to have that transparency. Again, it's an extension of your sales.
And it's not just on the sales that are actually completed. You should want to have access to the sales that aren't completed.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, listen, at the end of the day, we're still talking about people.
Yeah.
Rebuttals can always be better. Disclosures can always be, want to make sure that everything is perfect 100% of the time. And you deserve access to the wins and the losses no matter what. But that's the beautiful thing with some analytics is, we could have 1,000 calls analyzed and look back 90 days later and say, hey, which one's canceled and why? And hey, it was when these few words were said, there was a higher chance of, potential cancel. Or let's say you're doing a free trial and and you have a high cancel rate. Are you selling a service or are you selling a free trial? Mm-hmm. Right? Because if you're selling a free trial, you're essentially getting them to agree to 60 days or 30 days. Whereas if you're selling a service, then you're selling a multi-year relationship, right? Where you just happen to get a couple months for free.
Well, look, these have been really good. We talked a little bit about what to look for when selecting. Once you do best practices in onboarding and training. We looked at a little bit of that collaborative transparency management. Hopefully this is giving our viewers a really good look at what to look for, whoever they choose, which brings me to, we really didn't talk too much about Infinity. I brought it up in the beginning, but I want you to touch on something which I feel sets Infinity apart, and that's Buyerlytics. In fact, I may have mentioned earlier that Buyerlytics was such a thorough, strong execution methodology that we at the AISP partnered with you to use that as part of a assessing process, which leads to organizational certification, the CISO, Certified Inside Sales Organization. So those of you who have gone through that have in part gone through some of the methodology of Buyerlytics. So with that said, with just a minute or two remaining, what can you tell us about Buyerlytics and how that would help someone to look at Infinity, to perhaps select, onboard, and then continue a relationship with Infinity?
Yeah, so Buyerlytics is our revenue system, right? And it's a platform that integrates best-in-class elements of successful sales programs. So we're talking strategy, we're talking the technology, human talent, execution, data analytics, and all those are packaged into that revenue system. And that's kind of the idea behind Buyerlytics from a high level.
And in fact, the components you just mentioned, as we worked with Buyerlytics and Infinity on the assessment, on the Certified Inside Sales Organizational Assessment, they were all components of what I call a high-performing organization. You just touched on most of them, right? Training is another one. Leadership is another one. Sure. You have all those in there, and that's what you bring to a client to make sure that all those pieces are looked at and assessed with the relationship. Justin, is there anything else to add on that?
Yeah, again, as Zach kind of mentioned, Buyerlytics is essentially our go-to-market strategy. It's taking the gambling away from spending money. And we have companies that hire us, with our partnership with AISP, like we just talked about, where hey, maybe they don't want to outsource, but they want to benchmark things that they're doing versus the industry. Yep. And that's where the partnerships become so great. I'm really big on, listen, we can throw as much AI and as much stuff as we want, but listen, we're still in the people business.
Yeah, right.
And gambling with the people is not okay. Yeah. And so when we are creating programs, we need to create programs that are set up for success, not just for the revenue of the companies that hire us or for the revenue of Infinity, but for the people that have committed to that program with those companies. And I mean, if there's one thing to close on, I would just say, like, nobody in this whole process, and probably what you heard us talk about a lot, is when you're picking a partner, how do they treat their people? What's a day in the life of their people?
Yep.
You know, when you're launching a program, what happens when things go right and wrong with their people? And then when you're getting ready to go through the entire process, let's make sure we're doing this all for the people.
And look, I've been in and around Infinity and the people, and they are motivated, right? And your culture stands out, and I couldn't agree with you more. You know, motivated, happy, inspired, good culture people, they perform well. So that's a great note to end on. We're going to put your contact information up here. So people watching this, if they have any further questions on this, if they need a little help, if they're not, you know, looking at outsourcing, but think they might in the future and want to talk to you.
We're always here. We have a saying that we just want to make more friends, whether, you know, we do work together or not. Let's just make more friends, and we'll do business well together no matter what.
Well, everyone, thanks so much for watching this, and we hope it helped you in your outsourcing journey. Zach, Justin, thanks so much for your time and expertise, and we'll see you at another AISP event.
All right, thanks, Bob.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.